I refused to give a kidney to the brother who saved my life as a child, and now my family is tearing itself apart. I'm 32, and right now I'm sitting in the kitchen of my tiny apartment in Seattle, trying to force myself to drink cold coffee. My hands are shaking. It's not the caffeine. It's the message that came yesterday. Just a text from my mother, but it felt like an icy shower in the middle of February. Call urgently. James has serious problems. That was the beginning. And the serious problems, as it turned out, were terminal kidney failure. James is my older brother. He's 40. I have to start by saying that James was always a hero. Not just a good guy, but a real literal hero to our family, and most importantly, my savior. I was 7, he was 15. We were at the lake that summer. I, as usual, ventured where I shouldn't have and got caught in a current. None of the adults were fast enough. James jumped in, pulled me out of the water, though he nearly drowned himself. He was hospitalized for several days. All I remember is lying in my bed while my parents whispered that James was great, that he saved me. It became part of our family's mythology, his personal medal. Every time we gathered at the dinner table, someone would inevitably bring up the story. Our James, he's not just a brother, he's your guardian angel, Sarah. I never forgot it, and I always felt that I owed him. This feeling of guilt, or rather obligation, hung over me like a cloud, even when I grew up, moved away, and started my own life. But adult James is a completely different person. He's not the hero from the lake. He's become. I don't know how to describe it without cliches. Toxic? Yes. Over the past 10 years, he's turned into a person who felt everyone owed him something because he was a successful businessman. Though in reality, he just bought and flipped properties, constantly getting involved in risky schemes. He was contemptuous of my work in a non-profit organization, always making comments about me wasting my life, and generally pushing the narrative that his needs were more important. When I needed help after my breakup with Mark, he said, "Sarah, you're strong, deal with it yourself. I have an important deal coming up." It hurt, but I chalked it up to his character. I flew home 2 days after the call. Airport, taxi, the old house that smells of childhood and medicine. Mom met me with tear-filled eyes. Dad sat in the armchair. He had aged 10 years overnight. They got straight to the point. "No, how are you?" "No hugs." "You need to get tested, Sarah," Mom said, her voice shaking. "Tested for what?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "For compatibility." "With James," Dad replied, avoiding my gaze. "He can't wait long. His kidneys are almost gone." They knew I was healthy, that I had no contraindications. They knew that by the law of averages that haunts our family, I was very likely a match. And that's where everything started. "Sarah." Mom took my hand, her grip almost painful. "You know you have to do this? He's your brother. Your hero. He saved your life. If not you, then who? You are obligated." In that moment, something inside me snapped. Not from fear of the surgery, but from how easily they used that word, obligated. They didn't ask, they didn't plead. They demanded. They saw me not as a sister who could help, but as a tool that had to fulfill its duty. A duty that they themselves had built for decades upon that childhood trauma. All their love and recognition of my existence were built on the foundation of my debt to James. He saved my life, and now I have to save his. It was simple, cruel, but for them irrefutable arithmetic. I looked at their faces, so haggard and full of despair, and I saw in them not pain for their son, but certainty in my submission. They were just waiting for me to nod. They expected the same automatic obedience as 7 years ago, when James asked me to co-sign his first risky loan, the one that left me broke for months. "I'll think about it," I said. It was the first thing I could get out. A lie, but it bought me a minute to escape to my old room. I sat up all night staring at the ceiling, thinking not about the surgical risk but about the man he had become. He never apologized for how he treated me, for invalidating my successes, for constantly pressuring me, demanding things. He only called when he needed something. And now he needed my kidney. He didn't even call himself. He sent his parents. That was the worst part. He wasn't asking. He was just expecting me to fulfill my duty, my obligation. The next morning, I called the clinic where James was staying, under the pretense of wanting to know about the procedure. I spoke to the transplant coordinator. She was polite but very professional. She explained all the risks, that it was a serious operation, that one kidney might not be able to handle the load in the future. And then I asked something else. What if I don't want to? What if I refuse? The coordinator paused. That is your personal, absolutely voluntary decision, Sarah. No one can force you. That phrase, no one can force you, rang in my head like a church bell. I hung up the phone and felt the trembling stop in my body. The shaking was replaced by cold resolve. I went downstairs. My parents were sitting at the table waiting. I won't get tested, I said, looking them straight in the eyes. I won't be a donor, Mom. I won't be a donor, Dad. The silence that hung in the air was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Then Mom dropped her cup. It shattered with a clang that drowned out my own breathing. Dad's eyes narrowed, and Mom's face contorted into an expression I had never seen before. It wasn't grief. It was pure, unadulterated hatred. You. What? Mom whispered. I said no. My body. My choice. He saved your life. Do you remember that? Do you remember who he is to you? Dad yelled, jumping up from his chair. There was no pain in his voice, only fury and contempt. In that moment I realized that childhood story, that act of heroism, wasn't a rescue. It was an IOU for the rest of my life. And they had just called in the debt. The immediate aftermath of my refusal was not the explosive argument I had braced for. It was worse. It was a cold, calculated silence that descended upon the house, heavy and suffocating. My parents didn't scream or beg. They treated me like I was a stranger who had just wandered in, delivered bad news, and was now occupying their space without permission. It was the absolute, swift withdrawal of affection. Dad didn't talk to me for the rest of that day. He just walked past, his shoulders rigid, the air around him thick with contempt. He looked at me with the kind of expression you reserve for a low-life con artist who just stole your wallet. Mom tried a different tactic. She started crying quietly, intermittently, in the living room and in the kitchen. She didn't cry to me, she cried at me. Every sob was a perfectly timed performance designed to pierce my resolve and remind me of the monstrous thing I had just done. I stayed locked in my old bedroom. I couldn't leave, not because they locked me in, but because the tension outside the door was a physical barrier. I felt like I was in a pressure cooker. I kept replaying the scene in my head, focusing on the word, obligated. I wasn't just refusing an organ donation. I was rejecting the entire narrative of my life that they had written. And that rejection was costing me my family. The next morning, 2 days after I arrived, the phone calls started. Not from James, of course not. He was still the passive beneficiary of this family drama, but from extended family members. Aunt Carol from Ohio was first. Sarah. Her voice was tight and judgmental even over the phone. I just heard the news. Are you seriously going to let your brother die? After everything he did for you? Aunt Carol, I haven't let anyone die. I made a choice about my own body. A choice? This isn't about nail polish, Sarah. This is James. He risked his life for you. That's a debt you can't pay back with money. This is the ultimate test of character and you're failing it. I hung up on her. It felt good, a small rebellious act against the established order. But the calls kept coming, my uncle, my godmother, even an old family friend. They were all singing the same tune, choreographed by my parents. They painted me as selfish, ungrateful, and a murderer by inaction. They kept bringing up the lake incident, spinning it into a heavy, unbreakable chain around my neck. Meanwhile, James himself remained silent. This was the most intriguing part of the whole ugly mess. He had the energy to call his parents, to complain, to demand updates. I knew that much, but he couldn't pick up the phone and talk to me, his sister, the potential donor, the one who was now being crucified for him. Finally, for days into this silent war, I went to the hospital to see him. I needed to look him in the eye. I needed to see if the adult James, the arrogant, entitled one, had any genuine remorse, or if he was simply expecting his reward. He was pale, hooked up to and for, and looked genuinely unwell. I felt a surge of cold pity, quickly followed by a heavy dose of resentment. Hey James, I said, sitting on the edge of the hard plastic chair. He just grunted, not meeting my eyes. Mom and Dad told me what you said. I honestly didn't think you'd be such a hypocrite, Sarah. A hypocrite? Because I won't risk my life for someone who has treated me like garbage for 10 years? He laughed, a dry, rattling sound. Treat you like garbage? I saved your life. Do you know what kind of money this is costing me? The best care, private room, everything. And you're sitting here talking about some past feelings you have. It wasn't even about the dead anymore. It was about his profound, almost religious belief in his own superiority and my inferiority. He didn't see me as a person making a hard choice. He saw me as a malfunctioning resource. You're missing the point, James, I said, trying to keep my voice level. That lake incident was 25 years ago. You're not that person anymore. You've taken and taken from this family without ever giving back anything but criticism and stress. He finally looked at me, his eyes sharp and venomous. I don't need a lecture from a glorified charity worker, Sarah. You need to grow up and realize what's important. Life. My life. You owe me that, and everyone knows it. He then made a crucial, chilling mistake. He let slip a detail about his finances. And you know what the worst part is? If I don't get this transplant in the next 2 weeks, and finding a non-family donor takes months, I lose the Blackwood deal. The one I've been working on for 3 years. It's a multi-million-dollar venture. All because my own sister is being childish. The Blackwood deal. I had heard Mom and Dad stress over it for months. It was a massive, high-risk venture that would either make him a fortune or utterly bankrupt him and potentially take Mom and Dad's retirement savings with him. They had foolishly invested a chunk to support his dream. This wasn't just about his life anymore. It was about his fortune, and the financial well-being of our entire family, which was currently tied to his risky scheme. I realized then that his need for the transplant wasn't just a physical crisis. It was a deadline for a financial one. He needed the kidney now to stay in the game and secure his money. The urgency wasn't just medical. It was driven by greed. I stood up. I'm not doing this, James, I repeated, feeling stronger than before. You want to talk about obligation? You have an obligation to treat the people who care about you with respect, not like stepping stones to your next deal. I walked out of the room, leaving him staring after me. I knew the real war was just beginning, and it wasn't just about a kidney. It was about money, control, and the right to define our own values. The month had only just begun, and the pressure was already unbearable. The question of whether I was an asshole was no longer just a thought. It was the subject of every hostile phone call and silent glare. And I still hadn't revealed the real reason why I felt such a deep, visceral refusal to let him win this argument. The conflict didn't just escalate. It turned into a siege. After my visit to James in the hospital, the facade of familial concern from my parents completely crumbled, replaced by outright warfare. They didn't even try to hide the emotional manipulation anymore. They were operating under the explicit belief that any tactic was justified if it saved their golden boy and his multi-million-dollar Blackwood deal. My mother, Eleanor, who used to be the gentle mediator, became the chief operative. She changed the locks on the front door of the house I was technically staying in, and left the key for me under a flower pot, sending a clear message. You are tolerated here, but you are not welcome. The next day, the financial leverage started. My parents control a small trust fund that was set up by my grandmother for both James and me. It's not life-changing money, maybe $50,000, but it was my emergency fund, my safety net. Dad, Robert, sent me a cold, one-line email from his work account. If you continue with this path of refusal, the trust will be restructured immediately to secure James' medical costs. He is the priority now. This was a gut punch. They were threatening to take my financial security because I wouldn't compromise my physical health. It wasn't about the money itself. It was the betrayal, the willingness to leave me exposed just to force my compliance. I knew restructuring the trust would be legally messy, but the threat was enough to make me feel sick. They were using every weapon at their disposal. I called my only real ally, my close friend Chloe, who works in law. I needed validation that I wasn't completely insane. They can't force you to donate, Sarah, legally, end of story, Chloe confirmed, her voice firm. But they are absolutely using financial coercion. You need to distance yourself from the house and get a lawyer to look at that trust language right now before they move the funds. I took her advice immediately. I packed my bag, quickly, efficiently, like I was escaping a fire, and left the family house. I didn't say goodbye. Mom was in the living room whispering intensely on the phone to someone, probably another relative, coordinating the next smear campaign. I left the key on the kitchen counter, next to a note that just said, "No." I checked into a cheap motel near my friend Chloe's place. This whole ordeal had spanned exactly 1 week, and I was already living out of a suitcase, alienated from my family and fighting for my savings. The crucial conflict came 2 days later. James, prompted by his dwindling health and the impending deadline for the Blackwood deal, finally decided to call me himself. The call came late, around 11 p.m. His voice was weak, but the underlying tone of entitlement was still there, like rust under paint. "Sarah, it's James. I know who it is. What do you want?" I kept my voice flat, professional. He sighed dramatically. "Look, I know you're upset about whatever it is I supposedly did. I'm sorry if I hurt your feelings over the years. Okay, I apologize. Can we move past this? I'm dying, Sarah. I'm literally dying. The doctor said I have maybe 2 weeks before they have to put me on emergency dialysis, and that will ruin everything." He didn't sound sorry. He sounded like he was reading a script handed to him by a lawyer. The apology was a means to an end. "You're apologizing because you need something, not because you regret how you treated me," I challenged him. "What difference does it make why I'm apologizing? My life is on the line. And fine, yes, the Blackwood investors are getting nervous. If I miss this deadline because I'm incapacitated, the whole thing collapses. Mom and Dad lose their retirement savings and I'm ruined. Don't you care about them?" He was using their financial security as a shield now. The emotional and financial blackmail was complete. He was saying, "If I die, it's your fault. If they lose their money, it's your fault. You put their money at risk, James. You did that, not me." I retorted, my heart pounding. Then he went for the ultimate low blow, weaponizing the past in the most brutal way. "You know, you've never understood that day on the lake, have you? You think I was just some brave kid." His voice dropped to a sinister whisper. "The truth is, I was showing off for Dad. I jumped in and I got tangled up in some weeds too. I almost let go of you, Sarah. I was scared, I almost chose myself, and I still have nightmares about it. I put myself through hell to save you. And you're telling me that act of self-sacrifice means nothing now? You are rejecting my greatest trauma and my greatest act of love." That statement hung in the air. I almost chose myself. It was manipulative, intended to make me feel guilty for the burden he carried. But it also contained a seed of truth about his entitlement. He had performed a monumental act of sacrifice, and now he felt he was owed a lifelong dividend. "You're trying to use your own lingering trauma to shame me into surgery, James. That's disgusting," I said, feeling a surge of pure anger. "And what about my trauma? What about what happened after the lake?" I still hadn't revealed the main secret, the real reason I wouldn't do it, but the tension was now at its breaking point. I had drawn a line in the sand, and the entire family was mobilizing to step over it. The deadline for James's deal and his body's endurance was now only a matter of days. I knew the next confrontation would be the decisive one. The 10 days following James's desperate, manipulative call were the longest of my life. The pressure wasn't just coming from my family anymore. It felt like the entire universe was conspiring against me. I had moved into the motel, started consulting with Chloe about the trust, and felt completely isolated. The family communication was now purely hostile. My father was sending legalistic threats about the trust, and my mother was sending brief, damning texts. "Your brother is failing. Are you proud of yourself, Sarah?" I was exhausted, but the hostility had a strange effect. It clarified my purpose. The constant attacks confirmed that my initial no was correct. They weren't fighting for James's life as much as they were fighting for the preservation of their preferred family hierarchy and financial stability, which James's risky deals guaranteed if he lived. The true breaking point came on a Tuesday, exactly 2 weeks after I first got the call. I was meeting Chloe for lunch, reviewing the grim details of the trust fund paperwork. We were at a busy cafe, but I felt a familiar cold prickle of recognition. Sitting 2 tables away, looking surprisingly healthy despite his terminal diagnosis, was James. He wasn't alone. He was clean-shaven, wearing an expensive suit, and talking animatedly on his phone. He looked tired, yes, but not like a man who was days away from emergency dialysis. He looked like a high-powered executive stressing over a huge contract. He was definitely not acting like a desperate patient. I stared, completely frozen. Chloe followed my gaze. "Is that him?" she whispered. I didn't answer. I watched as he ended his call, took a deep breath, and then opened a sleek briefcase. He pulled out a stack of documents, the Blackwood deal paperwork, and began highlighting sections with a focus that was terrifyingly normal. He wasn't even attempting to look sickly in public. He was just working. I suddenly realized the horrific extent of the manipulation. His condition was serious, that much was medically true, but the timetable, the imminent death narrative, was a calculated exaggeration. He needed the kidney now not to survive the next week, but to ensure he could close his deal without being pulled into emergency care that would sideline him for months. He was prioritizing millions of dollars over the immense physical and psychological burden he was forcing onto me, his sister. That moment, seeing him alive, functioning, and focused entirely on finance, was my turning point. I didn't need any more moral debate. I needed to expose the truth that gave me the leverage I needed. I walked over to his table. Chloe made a noise of alarm, but I ignored her. "James," I said, my voice dangerously calm. He looked up, and the color drained from his face. His executive mask cracked. "Sarah? What are you doing here? I thought you were with Mom and Dad." "I'm doing great. You, on the other hand, look remarkably well for a man whose organs are supposedly shutting down tomorrow. What's the dialysis schedule? After you close the Blackwood deal?" He slammed the briefcase shut. "Don't start this, Sarah. This is a public place. The public should know what a moral monster you are," I hissed. "You and our parents have been using a 25-year-old rescue as emotional collateral to force me into major surgery, not just to save your life, but to save your bank account." He leaned in, his voice a desperate, low growl. "You don't understand the stakes. If I lose this deal, Mom and Dad lose everything they invested. Everything. It affects all of us. And that's your fault, James. But that is not the debt I owe you. The debt I owe you is from the lake. And you keep throwing that in my face. You keep saying I owe you my life." I looked him straight in the eye, and the words, the secret I had carried for 25 years, finally erupted. "You want to know why I can't give you that kidney? You want to know what happened after you saved me from the water, James? The thing I've been hiding all these years?" He recoiled slightly, a flicker of genuine fear in his eyes. He knew instinctively that I was about to detonate the entire foundation of our family's history. "You saved me from the water. You were the hero. The nurses gave me a clean bill of health and sent me home. But Mom and Dad couldn't handle the medical bills, the ones for your hospitalization, James, not mine. The cost of your heroism." I paused, letting the weight of the realization sink into him. He looked utterly bewildered. I was 7. When we got home 2 weeks later, Dad pulled me aside. He told me that I was a burden, that your recklessness and my carelessness had put the family in serious debt. He told me that I had to earn back the money that they spent saving my life. James's mouth dropped open. From that day on, he made me do extra chores every day without fail. Not normal kid chores. He would give me a little notebook and say, "You earned $5 today, Sarah." And he would deduct it from a running total of the hospital bills. He kept a tally. The debt I owed for my life was $7,321.45. I leaned in closer, my voice breaking with the sheer, cold pain of the memory. "I worked until I was 17, James. 10 years. I didn't get an allowance. I just chipped away at the balance for the life you saved. You were the hero, I was the debtor. And every time they praised you, they reminded me of my balance. They called you my savior, but they treated me like the cost. And that's the real reason I can't give you this kidney. Because I paid the debt for my life 20 years ago, and I am not putting myself into debt again." I pushed the stack of his Blackwood documents slightly toward him. "You already ruined my childhood by making me pay for the life you saved. Now you want me to pay with my body for the fortune you might make. I'm done paying your bills, James." I turned, leaving him alone in the cafe, surrounded by his documents and his shocked, guilty silence. The moral dilemma was over. It was about justice and freedom. I had finally revealed the true source of my refusal. The moment I walked out of the cafe, leaving James stunned amidst his investment papers, the entire landscape of the conflict shifted. The secret was out. The foundation of our family's heroic sacrifice narrative had been exposed as a grotesque financial manipulation, carried out by my own father. I drove straight back to Chloe's place, my body shaking violently, but my mind was clearer than it had been in 32 years. I had finally told someone besides myself the specific, brutal math of my childhood debt. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. James must have gone straight home because within an hour, my phone started ringing incessantly. It was my mother, Eleanor. I ignored the first 10 calls. When I finally answered, the voice on the other end was not the usual tearful manipulator, but a roaring hurricane. "Sarah, what did you tell him? What kind of lies are you spreading about your father?" She screamed. "It's not a lie, Mom. I told him about the notebook. About the $7,321.45. About the 10 years of chores I did to pay for my life." Eleanor went silent for a beat. When she spoke again, her voice was low, laced with venomous denial. "That was discipline. We were teaching you responsibility. You were reckless, and Robert was trying to instill the value of money. We were in debt because of the costs of your care and James's recovery." "The bills were for James's recovery, Mom. I was discharged the next day. You made me pay for his heroism. You turned his act into my bondage. You've been collecting on a debt for 25 years, and now you want the final payment in the form of an organ." The line crackled. "You are destroying this family," she shrieked. "Your brother is dying. If he loses this deal, we lose everything. You are choosing some childish grudge over your family's survival." "No, Mom," I said, my voice steady, finally free of the debt I had carried. "You already destroyed the family when you put a price tag on my life, and I refuse to be held emotionally hostage anymore." I hung up, blocked their numbers, and turned off my phone. I gave them 2 days of complete silence. 2 days for the truth to rot in their meticulously constructed world. On the third day, the day James was supposedly hitting his medical crisis point, I unblocked Chloe and she forwarded me an email. It was from James. Not a pleading email, but a cold, transactional one, copying in his lawyer and mine, who Chloe had quickly secured. Subject: the trust and next steps. "Sarah, I have confirmed with Dad the details regarding the costs you mentioned. Regardless of the context, I will instruct our mutual lawyer to transfer your portion of the trust, $50,000, immediately and in full. Consider this a final repayment of all past family obligations. For the record, I have secured a non-family compatible donor overseas. The surgery is scheduled for the end of the month. I will also be pulling out of the Blackwood deal. The risk is too high given my current health and the inability to guarantee my availability. Mom and Dad have been informed about the deal and the donor. We will not be in contact. I wish you the best. James." The resolution was jarring in its swift, sterile finality. No reconciliation. No apology for the notebook. Just a transaction. He was paying me off to eliminate the last shred of my leverage and clear his conscience enough to get a kidney from a stranger. He had pulled the plug on the Blackwood deal, realizing that the greed-driven urgency had backfired and cost him the only family match. He chose his life, but he sacrificed his fortune and his entire relationship with me in the process. My money hit my bank account the next day. A clean $50,000 transfer signed off by my father. It wasn't the money I cared about, it was the symbol of my freedom. The family debt was finally officially settled. I never spoke to James again. He survived the transplant and, according to a mutual acquaintance, moved to a smaller city to restart his life, his hero status entirely stripped bare. My parents, after their initial furious, despairing attempts to contact me, retreated into their own bubble of silence, likely still processing the ruin of their perfect family narrative. They lost their heroic son's fortune and their obedient daughter's presence in a single intense month. As I look out the window of my new small apartment, I used a chunk of that trust money for a security deposit and the first month's rent. I feel a complex emptiness. I am safe. I am free. I am not an asshole for refusing to sacrifice my body for a debt I had already paid. But I am alone. The price of freedom was the absolute severing of my roots. I am left with the philosophical realization that sometimes, the deepest acts of supposed love and sacrifice are just the longest, cruelest form of emotional accounting. James saved my life on the lake, but it took me 32 years and a fight over a kidney to finally save myself from the debt they imposed. I don't know if I'll ever see them again, but I know one thing. I am no longer anyone's property. The ledger is closed.